the Elevate EHS podcast. I'm your host, Hilary. I'm going to let you take a moment to introduce yourself, talk a little bit about your career, and we are going to dig into this podcast and answer and ask some very interesting EHS questions.
Thank you, Hilary. Yeah, my name is David O'Brien. I've got about 32 years in the industry, and I've worked as the EHS senior leader for the Americas. So that's what my role is currently. How I got started in EHS is really unique. I didn't start off my career as EHS. I actually was a jet engine mechanic in the military. Due to a event that occurred, it changed my direction in life, right? So there was a tragic accident that occurred, and I started getting more involved in safety due to that accident. Started off small, like most military things do, right? The collateral duties. And that expanded in the military until I became basically a safety department leader over 2,300 sailors and Marines on a ship. That kind of evolved my career. And once I retired from the military, started working in general industry for a large company, unique just to safety related items, machine guarding, lockout, tagout, contractor safety, fall protection. But that quickly expanded into environmental programs as well, how that works. Hazardous waste, things like that, and then continued to growth, right? So the company saw the uniqueness in that and took over a role as a EHS leader for a site, and then, of course, more on a corporate level role where there's multiple sites, and that's where I'm at today. Hard to believe that's 32 years quickly in a nutshell, but it's amazing how quickly it goes by. I think when you enjoy what you do, it doesn't seem like work, and I'll tell you that I really enjoy what I do and working with people and finding unique ways to ensure that people are safe.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you for all of your years of diligent work in EHS. It's not an easy career. And certainly, I like to say it's a marathon with a disappearing finish line, right? You're just constantly, even when you achieve one milestone, you're on to the next one, you're on to the next one to be better and better, right? So that we can save as many lives as possible and protect this planet of ours. So let's get into some of these questions, right? I want to hear your opinions about who should be doing these observations, the audits of the lockout takeout procedures? What role should be doing those? And then what are your opinions on individual observations versus group observations, right? Which we know OSHA approves.
Yeah. So typically what we would do, and I've done this in a previous company to this, is we had observations done by our maintenance technicians. So that was one thing, and then our supervisors. So it was almost a three-tiered process that we would use. So maintenance technicians to maintenance technicians, then we would require our supervisors to do the same thing, right? They would have to be trained in lockout, tagout, so then they would, and then of course it would level up to myself. So I would typically do 1 to 2 a month on that observation. They would do 4 at the supervisor level, and then at the maintenance technicians level, anywhere from 8 to 10 observations as that process was going on. So you would do what we would be is cross-functional. We had different departments, right? So you would go to another department to do that observation, right? You'd follow their procedure and complete that observation. That was one of the ways we did it. Plus, like I said, it was a learning evolution too, right? So when you watch somebody else do something, you're always learning, hey, what did I do different? What could I do differently to improve my own self? So that was one of the processes that we used at a different company that I was at. I would say that in today's world, technology, right? Everything on your cell phone today. I will tell you that technology has made things so great, right? You can go out on your phone and you can literally do an observation right on your phone in real time, and it gets uploaded to a system. So it's a perfect setting today. So you can see things as they're occurring instead of waiting for a paper copy to come to you to evaluate or getting lost in a filing cabinet, which I've seen so many times before, where you may get 100 observations, but only 3 of them get looked at. So from an electronic standpoint, you can see that in real time, which is a wonderful thing.
Oh, exactly. And to the automation of the escalation to be able to resolve actions and things like that, to me is one of the biggest optimizations that technology gives us, because we go out, right? We do this great audit. We get all this information. Let's say it's the lockout takeout audit, right? And we're running through and we're checking all the pieces, and we find out we're missing a specific energy isolating device that we need to have for this piece of equipment. It wasn't here. That means people aren't using it. So I need to procure one, right? Specifically for this piece of equipment or this area. I also found out there's a mistake here, right? We got the breaker name wrong. That's something that's going to potentially get people to make an error during the lockout takeout process. So to be able to real time say, I did this audit, right, of this procedure. Here are the 2 actions that I've determined. I'm assigning those to people in the system, right? And then it's automatically sends those notifications to those people to say, hey, an action's been assigned to you. You need to do this. It's critical. It's related to lockout takeout. It needs to be done in the next 48 hours before any more lockout takeouts are done on this equipment or whatever it may be, right? How awesome is that? That you don't have to run around and remember and go talk to people and deal with all that inefficiency.
Yeah, and just the fact, like I said today, the connection with our iPhones or even iPads or things, right? Where you're not sitting in an office trying to do this at your desk in real time. You can do this right out on the floor, right? So it's so much easier. Like I talk about real time and technology today, how far it's gotten us. Because I think of 32 years ago when I started, everything was done on a document piece of paper or it was done through a different system. Where today, like I said, things are instantaneous. We're just doing this so quickly. And if that system's set up, send emails or notifications to the right people, I'm aware as the EHS lead, hey, there's an issue here, and I can go get that issue corrected, or I can direct the right people to get that issue corrected. Like I said, technology is a wonderful advancement. So,
amazing, amazing. Thank you for sharing that. What are your thoughts before we leave lockout takeout? Because I think 2 areas that I want to hit that I see as still considerable gaps in programs as in our practitioner careers. The first one being, how do you keep up with machine improvements, right? And the interlocks, which category the interlocks are, how they work. Is it really dropping it out to 0 energy, or is it just putting it in pause mode, right? And is that compliant or not? How do you keep up with the machine optimization side of things for lockout takeout? And then the second thing, let's talk a little bit about training, because we know that's always a significant undertaking.
Yeah, I would say in general industry, it's difficult because, of course, if you look at a really large plant that has 8,000 pieces of machinery, which is the first plant that I worked in, cost is always a driver for that. When we talk about looking for optimization, when you get to that point, how do you identify where your highest risk machinery are? Where do I need to spend my capital to make those improvements, right? In the old days, we did everything on a paper copy. I was fortunate enough to work with somebody who was really good at creating computerized systems, and we developed a process to identify where our highest risk equipment was. And then we could force the entity to say, hey, this is what we need to focus on. But I'll go back to what I talked about earlier, MOC, management of change. I think it's really important to ingrain that in the business to understand, hey, when we make changes, I don't want to be blind to the change that's going on. I want to be involved in what's going on. So if you're going to go buy a piece of new machinery, does it meet the new requirements for that guarding requirements? Is it going to fail safe if it fails? Or are there going to be energy sources turned on? Making sure that the entity that you're working for is involved in that process, promoting it, making sure the checklists are good, and then the follow through. Because what I've seen is the company that I worked for was really good at the upfront part of MOC, but they weren't very good at the end part of MOC. You know, the pre-startup safety reviews that we were required to do to make sure, hey, everything that we talked about up front, hey, is it working we expected it to? From a lotto standpoint, hey, when you bring in that new piece of machinery, does it do that? Do you have a process to where if you open the door, everything's going to shut off and you're not exposing your employee to a certain risk? But you know, as that process continually goes through that elevation portion of it, you want to make sure that, hey, I've identified my highest risk and I'm focusing on getting those high risk items corrected or fixed or replaced, utilizing the MOC process so we don't go out and purchase something that's not going to do what we want it to do, or have those safeguards in place that we need to meet the new requirements. I think that's one of the things that I'm pushing at my current role, where, hey, we need to make sure that we're getting out in front of this, not trying to fix it after it's already in the door.
Yeah. And I would even go further to say like a 3-step process with a post-startup analysis, right? After 1 to 2 weeks of activity is also impactful, because guess what we never assume machinery is going to do? Jam.
Yeah.
Right? We don't plan for these failures, right? When we're purchasing and procuring new equipment and saying, this is how it's going to run, and it's going to run 90% OEE, and it's going to do this and it's going to do that, right? No, it's not going to. I guarantee, especially as we get started. So how are we dealing with jams? So having a post-startup evaluation and MOC of how are we dealing with jams? Is it a safe way? Are we using lockout takeout? Are we using a tool? Are we just putting our hands in and fixing the jam? How is lockout takeout interacting with some of these machine issues that we often see with automation, right?
Yeah, developing good APMs, right? So how do I work with the theory in that thing? I've seen it before where somebody will use a bypass key in an interlock system and say, okay, so where are your instructions to say, how do I not expose myself to the point of operation while I'm setting up this piece of equipment? Is there a key to turn it in from a run mode where it runs at a constant to other things? Yeah, definitely work instructions, making sure employees understand that. One of my current challenges for sure.
Documented APMs. I want to talk about this. I'm so glad you brought this up. So for those, our listeners who don't know, right? OSHA does have an exception in the lockout takeout regulation, which says, hey, you don't have to do lockout takeout if it meets certain criteria. And so actually developing what's called an APM, an alternative protective measure, right? That's what that stands for. It's something I always dreamed a business would actually document by machine and say, this is our alternative protective measure. Under these circumstances, we will allow you to bypass lockout takeout if you have these protective measures in place as prescribed here. Now, David, have you ever got to a point in your business where you have documented APMs by machine? Just curious.
Like I said, it's one of my current challenges right now. We're in because it's something that's been identified, right, that we're missing or we're lacking. But I would tell you in the first industry that I worked in after retirement, that was something that they developed actually right into the lockout tagout procedures. Literally, it had steps listed in there on what you could do to ensure that was, like I said, very large business and had the resources to do that. Of course, not everybody does. But what are my users doing where they're bypassing the process of lockout tagout? Now, how do you identify that? You're never going to identify it unless you get out there and see what they're doing. It could be initial adjustments, clearing jams, like you said earlier. That first, quite often. How do you do that? How do you do that safely?
Yep. Even doing that, I think it's better to just, the first step is to get over the ignorance, like you said. So even just doing a survey of when do we put our hands inside this machine and we don't have it locked out? Just tell me those circumstances, right? Just talk me through that. Not saying it's wrong, just want to seek to understand, right? And then working through that kind of ladder of activities to figure out which ones are complying, non-complying, where we might be able to use the tool instead of hands, et cetera. That's that proactive risk management and lockout takeout. So hard to get to that point. I feel for you in this journey. I've had the same in my experience and career. Good luck on your pathway pursuing lockout takeout excellence. That's even just having this conversation is a step in the right direction.
Yeah, it's always growing. Yeah, always surprised to learn new things for sure.
Yep. It's never going to end, right? Because the machinery is going to continue to evolve, as we all know. We got to evolve with it or get left behind, right?
Absolutely.
We've talked a little bit about management of change, but why don't you structure for me what would be your best in class management of change process? How is it structured? Who participates? How is it deployed?
So management of change, right? A lot of people hear the word, and I will tell you from a quality standpoint, I think they also have change management. So it gets confusing sometimes when you think about that. What I've done in the past is we've created a two-part form. So I talked about the MOC, which is the upfront process where you're identifying, hey, what's the change, right? What programs are going to be implemented are affected by this? Would it be ergonomics? Is it going to be electrical? Is it going to be machine guarding? Is it going to be lockout, tagout? So basically a checklist that helps you get through that process.
One of the things, a scoping.
So you're not missing anything because it's easily overlooked, right? If you, hey, what are we changing today? What did I miss? So having that form that does that process. And I will tell you that you should have members from each area that this change is occurring in, from leadership all the way down to the person who's using it, involved in that process, because you may not see things, all things. And I'll tell you from a facility standpoint, because I ran a facilities team, electrical, what pneumatics need to be dropped into the area, what things need to be done, creating all that process up front so you can identify the things that you need to do. And I liked your point on, hey, once you start that process, hey, is it working like we expected it to work? Making sure you're doing that follow through check. But we had a secondary part we called our PSSR, which is, okay, we identified all these risks up front. We've implemented training. We're doing this in a ventilated area. Hey, we created the lockout tagout procedure, all those things that you've done up front. But what did we miss in the PSSR, right? Hey, did we didn't think about the waste that this machine's going to produce, right? We didn't think about those things. So that follow-through process. And then making sure you're going back to leadership. One of the things that we did is we set up a weekly meeting, whether we did the MOC or not, just because it became a part of the routine. Everybody on site understood, hey, every Tuesday, we're going to do a management of change review. So any changes that engineering wants to propose or whatever, this was the process to do it. It became a part of the routine, a part of the standard every week. So everybody was aware of it. I think that was one of the gaps. Because I will tell you, engineering is synonymous with making changes without letting EHS know. Hey, we're buying this new machine. We're going to create this new process. We're going to do that. So making sure that they're aware up front, hey, we have this every week and you're going to do that. Because I was basically the gatekeeper to say, nothing's coming in the door unless I'm aware of it, right, through that process. Setting that establishment up front, because I think you'll find that, like I said, engineers, hey, I need this new chemical. What's a carcinogen? They have no idea what you're talking about when you think of that. Creating that process and then making sure that leadership is visible to us. Each month, we would have a list of the things that we were changing and where we were progressing on those lists. We would set a target that, hey, it's going to take 6 months to implement this change. Hey, it's going to take 2 years to implement this change. Step by step. Hey, where are we progressing in that? Is it change? Is the cost change? Because, of course, cost is always a big driver when you think of that. Hey, we're buying a new machine. We're spending $500,000. We want to make sure we get it right. Once you get the machine in the door, I can't send it back. That's not right.
So true. So tell me a little bit, you had brought up tech before, right? And optimizing workflows, actions, document management. Talk to me a little bit more about what you've incorporated, what you've brought to your businesses over the years to optimize the workflow execution with tech to enhance visibility of EHS. Have you done it for management of change yet? Have you found a good tech solution?
We tried it. We tried management of change through a technology system that we had, the same system we were using to track our incident records and stuff. I think what we were finding is we weren't getting as much buy-in from those groups. Maybe it's just we didn't make it user-friendly enough, which is where I think is key, right? You got to make things user-friendly. We did most of our MOC stuff on paperwork, but I have actually seen it to where it's done in a computerized setting. Not on the platform that I'm in currently, on a different platform where I said, hey, this is really good, because what it would do is each area would have a process they would do. Once they checked off on that process, it would move that MOC to the next group. If you had engineering or you had materials or you had your site leadership, it would progress that process through.
Yeah.
They say, hey, here's the change that we're trying to implement. These are the things that we identified as things that need to be done up front of that change. Hey, are you approving of it? And they would have to be approved by that next level. So I've seen that, and it was actually, I don't know what the program was. It was done on an iPad, and somebody said, yeah, this is a really good form. It looks just like the paper form, right? It's the same process. You're just hitting the boxes and you're checking it. And down at the bottom is where that approval process went through. We go to the, hey, engineering team, hey, EHS, hey, facilities, right? So each person has to buy off on it. I think if you had the right program, it'd be perfect. But right now, I will tell you that we've done it on paper for a while.
Yeah, I feel like it's one of those that just hasn't come around, right? In technology solutions in the way that I expected it to, right? It hasn't become like a core part of offerings. All tech companies listening in, this would be awesome to take and to manage, right? Because it's one of the biggest risk gaps I always see in my businesses. And it's shocking to me when a company is ISO certified, right? In 45,001, 14,001, which has a specific call out for management of change programs. And we're still not where we need to be, right, with our EHS management system.
I tell you, if you can make things user-friendly, people do them. And technology today is truly a benefit. Because if you can do things on your cell phone, anybody can do it. Because in today, everybody uses cell phones. So it's got that process. If you can figure out how to develop it to where it runs through that process, I think it's going to replace the paper copy thing. Because the means of tracking it are going to be much better than when we track it on an Excel spreadsheet. Because somebody's got to stay on top of that. Because if you have somebody leave, nobody knows where all that information is at. An electronic database, it's going to be the best way to do that. Because everybody.
Do you know what Exactly. But you know what I really like about what you said, and this is a key kind of like thing that I've been thinking a lot about in this role that I'm in with SafetyStratus. Tech, right? Tech is great and tech can do a lot for you, right? It can really advance you, it can create optimizations. But the point that you brought up about the regular weekly meeting, right? I would call that process. And then people participating in that process, showing up, contributing their knowledge, right? Asking the right questions, making sure we've got everything considered. That's the people side of things, right? So tech is only as good as the process that you use to drive it, right? And the people that contribute to it. And this has been such like an eye-opening concept for me. We've all heard people process technology. That's a really old methodology, right? From years ago. I can't remember at the time. Sorry for whoever came up with it. I'm not giving their authoring rights to, but this is an old concept, right? But I'm seeing it so much now with the evolution of technology. Don't you agree? You've got to have a really strong process and people behind tech in order to get the true return on investment.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, I became a gatekeeper because I didn't like the way the process was working in the past. They had brought on chemicals that were like, hey, I would have never brought this chemical on because of the exposure it puts to our employees. So creating that process up front, and when you talk about the meeting, I said, okay, I'm becoming a gatekeeper. I hate to say it that way. I know it sounds, hey, you got to do it this way or else. But after a short period of time, people understood it. So they would just ask up front, hey, I want to do this. What should I do next? So having a good process in place is going to be successful. Then creating the tools where you talk about the technology. Yeah. How do you make this easier? How do we track it? How do we ensure that we're doing everything correctly? Having that process up front, right, and explaining that process so that people understand it is good development. But that's with anything, not just MOC, with anything, right? Having a good process in place to be successful, right? To get people to buy into that process. We go all the way back to our beginning of our conversation, making sure that you're talking to people and they understand what it is that you're trying to create. I always take that approach. Hey, what's my role? What's my job? And this is what I explain to them. I'm here to make sure employees are safe, that we're meeting our compliance obligations. How do we do that as a group better and achieve our goals from a production standpoint?
The other thing, tip and trick that I used, right? I think so often when we find a gap, right? And we want to make a new process. Our first inclination is to say, okay, we're making a new process. It's going to be this hour meeting. It's going to be every Wednesday. Everyone should come in person. It's going to be here. And then people don't show, right? People miss it. They don't want to come. They don't understand. And I think my feedback to the EHS personnel is, why did you make something new that's too difficult, right? For people to go incorporate into their regular schedule. It seems like too much. Shorten it up. It only needs to be 15 minutes, right? Keep it nice and short and sweet and tack it on to an activity where people are already expected to be there in person and gather, like tier meetings. The managers are already all expected to be in person, to come and to do a tier meeting. Tack on the MLC meeting 15 minutes after that and hold people over, or even 5 minutes, right? Just to have the conversation. And I guarantee you'll see participation skyrocket. All right, one of our last questions here, and my favorite topic, engagement. So how would you suggest EHS professionals balance these responsibilities, right, that they have, and get out and engage employees to foster a culture of safety and collaboration?
I go back to what I said to begin with. We're hired as EHS professionals to ensure our employees are safe, right? We don't want injuries to occur and to keep the business safe from compliance issues, right? You don't want to get fined and things like that. So that's always our first objective and our number one goal, right? And I found that explaining that to my employees, right, when I talk to them, hey, this is what I'm here for. This is what my role is in the field. But always coming in with the approach of never telling someone when you see something they're doing something wrong. Ask them why they're doing it that way. Getting to know your employees, understanding their perspective on things. Like I said, I go back to being a jet engine mechanic, so I understand what it is to go out there and work. And hey, I've got to get my boss telling me, hey, I've got to have all this stuff done and fixed within this time frame, which is an impossibility. But you got to figure out how you're going to do that. When you approach your employees, understanding that they're under certain pressures, right? And you're there to try to keep them safe, right? And do those things. And then asking them, hey, this is an issue. This is something that I've noticed. How do you say we resolve that issue? This is the objective I'm trying to get to. you're, like you said, putting your hand in the machine to do this, and that's exposing you to a risk or an injury. And I've actually been a part of some serious injury reviews where we've had to identify why this person lost a hand, right, in a situation. Why were you doing that? Where you've got that question, what can we build to ensure that you don't do that? When we talk about APMs, or how do we either enterprise a tool into the process so you're not sticking your hand in the machine to do that. But understanding their perspective, working with them to come up with a resolution will always benefit you. We talk about safety culture, right? Typically, safety culture doesn't change overnight, right? I will tell you, if you can gain the trust of your employees by listening to them, and I've found this, they will buy into what you're selling. We're going to come up with a solution so you can meet your objectives and I can meet my objectives, and we're going to work together. People will buy into that every day, especially if you can convince them, hey, this is our idea, not my idea, right? Once they see that, they're on board with it. And when you talk about safety culture, one of the sites that I worked at here in Georgia, when I first moved here to Georgia, was that way, right? So they were an acquisition from another company, had a very different culture from the company that I was in. We were trying to integrate that culture. And we got to that point after about 2 to 3 years due to the fact that I listened, right? I listened to what they had to say, and we worked together on projects to meet the objectives that I had, keeping you safe, making sure that regulatory compliance is in place. Once I did that, it ran itself. When new employees came in, the culture was there. It's not like I had to do the work. The people they worked for already had the culture. And they knew, hey, you've got to follow these rules. This is why we're doing that. And it worked out, right? So it doesn't happen overnight. They have to trust you and see that you're really out there to help them. And then they'll buy into it. And like I said, the culture kind of runs itself.
EHS is a trust building exercise. Again, another coin term from Hilary. I would say to my teams, it is primarily that. If you don't have your integrity, if employees don't feel that you're looking out for them and you care about them as a human being first, before you're expecting them to make product at a certain quality, at a certain timeline, at a certain cost, good luck with all the other goals and objectives that you want to achieve at your business. If they don't feel that you care about them and you're not putting them at risk every day, you can't get any place, right? It's at the bottom of that Maslow's hierarchy of needs for a reason, right? You have to feel safe as a human being in order to proceed with all the other things that human beings can achieve together, right? That concept, I feel, is just so often overlooked by businesses.
Yeah, it shouldn't just always be about, hey, this is what we do at work, but hey, I know about your family, you know about my family. We've created a bond together. We know that we're looking out for each other, not just because, hey, it's my job, but because we're attached personally, right? People, like I said, once people feel that way, they'll do anything for you. You come in, they don't feel like, hey, I'm being scolded. Because if you're the EHS professional that's always coming in saying, hey, you're doing something wrong, you're doing something wrong, people will just turn off. I mean, they're going to run when you walk in the door, and that's not what people.
Yeah, to me, always what my biggest fear was in walking around and doing audits was that you'd make eye contact with someone and they would immediately go and grab and put their PPE on. There's that culture of, I'm only doing it because the EHS person is here and they're doing a walkthrough and I don't want to get yelled at or get in trouble or anything. That to me is so indicative of your culture. This should never be the case. It should be the same operations, whether the CEO is here or the EHS director is here or whoever's walking through, right? This is just the way that we do business. This is how we treat our people with high integrity, high morality. Compliance assurance is something that is built in, right? And then we're working towards risk mitigation and risk reduction, right? Because it's the right thing as a business.
Yeah, like I said, if you build the culture in and the culture's there, and I've seen this happen before where we've had outside entities come into a plant, right? And they go into an area where they should be wearing safety glasses and they're not. Even the employees say, hey, you got to wear safety glasses here. So that you talk about that behavior, right? Creating that culture. Like I said, once you've created that culture, it'll just flourish, especially if they feel confident. Hey, this is my responsibility. I need to say this person instead of, oh, this is an executive. He's got a tie on and a suit. I'm not going to say anything because I don't want to step on anybody's toe. But feeling confident in saying that, you talk about building culture and creating that culture from an EHS standpoint. Hey, we want you to say something to somebody, right? Point that out, right? Because believe it or not, that person's probably going to appreciate the fact that you did that because it shows that you're committed to that process.
Yeah, and frankly, if they don't, they're out of order. No one should ever feel, certainly a leader in an organization should ever look down on an activity like that, where an employee is trying to look out for them and their family to make sure that they make it home the same way that they showed up. David, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for being officially my first guest on the Elevate EHS podcast. We hit a ton of topics today. I can't thank you enough for your time and for all that you're doing to make a difference in the lives of your employees every day and your role. And being an EHS leader I just feel such an often underappreciated position, right, for its complexity and what it pulls from you. So thank you for all that you do.
I thank you, Hilary, for having me on the show. I really appreciate it. I love to share my story, and it's great to be able to do that on your podcast.
Awesome. Listeners, thanks for listening in, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.